One of the questions that a lot of founders ask is what language or framework they should be using when they start their startup. And what I usually tell them is the most important thing by far is just the speed, how fast you can iterate, how fast you can move. It really trumps any other type of language or framework that you have. A lot of times they kind of want to emphasize in terms of speed of the actual service, or they try to say that certain types of services would be more useful in the future once their startup grows. But the issue with that is it kind of hinders them until they reach that stage. You kind of have to look at it from the perspective of a competitor that you're up against. And let's say that they chose a framework that they're very familiar with, that they can easily find other developers for, that's kind of tried and proven. And let's say this competitor starts off with no users, they can iterate very fast because they have experience and they're not hindered by learning the new framework. Versus if you go with a framework that you don't know that much about, it's really hard for you to iterate and get new versions out there. So you might never even reach the scale that you're preparing for. Meanwhile, this other competitor, they're iterating, and at the point that they reach a lot of users, then they could figure out whether or not they need to change their technology stack. What I've seen a lot of times is very few even change their technology stack. They can actually work within the framework that they're working with. Premature optimization is a big issue that I've seen with a lot of startup founders. And the frameworks that are been in use right now, they've already solved a lot of the problems that the founders are afraid of. And yes, it is possible that certain frameworks can scale to millions and millions of users easily, but it doesn't mean that the frameworks that are in use right now can't do that as well. PHP is an old framework, but that's what runs Facebook, which has billions of users. Rails has been around for a long time, and that runs Twitter, and it's been running fine. There could be brand new frameworks, and it could be easier to scale theoretically with other frameworks. But scaling is actually a very tiny problem. It's almost a problem that you're happy to have eventually. The bigger issue is getting all those users. And if you have to pay a tax every time you're iterating because you don't know this framework or still figure out a certain framework, that could be an issue. That could be an issue when you're starting off. And at the beginning, that's what you need the most. You need to go as fast as possible. In a startup, speed is one of the most important ways to victory, and you have to iterate as fast as possible. Take in information in terms of what your customers want, what they're asking for, and based off of that, iterate to the next version. The more versions you're able to iterate to, the more likely you're able to succeed when it comes to a startup. And if you're hindered by your technology because you're trying to learn a brand new technology, then that could be a big issue. So at the end of the day, it's best to stick with a framework that you already know or that you're comfortable with or you could easily expand into. For example, if you already know Ruby, or if the company you're working for or your friends already know Ruby, that's what you should really stick with, because you'll be able to iterate faster. Once it comes time for you to hire people, it'll be easier for you to find people and vet people that know that language well. And then down the line, when you have the awesome problem of having too many users or too much scale, then you can confront the realities of whether or not you should switch. But by you having the hindrance of a brand new technology that you have no idea about, by having that every day as you're starting off, that could really slow you down and can actually prevent you from having a successful startup to begin with. So as long as you know the framework, as long as you're comfortable with it, as long as it's not too esoteric. If it's a brand new, even if you know a brand new framework or language very well, but if it's not well known inside the community, you might have issues when it comes time to hiring new developers. So it's up to you, use your better judgment. But at the end of the day, the vast majority of startup founders do the best if they can use a framework that they're already comfortable with.